only going to ask one favor. Would you mind not using flashlights? Because I can't see. You know, I've been going around the country for a long time talking about art. Well, I started out about 15 years ago at a time when I thought the American people were kind of selling themselves short on the subject of art. As a matter of fact, I think I can prove, having now been in around 450 cities around the country, I didn't even know there were that many. And I think I can sort of prove to you one way or another, if you're interested later on when we have a question and answer period, that indeed America is a very cultural country and that we have a lot going for us in the way of art. But a couple of years ago, somebody came to me and they said, why don't you ever tell us anything about yourself, about the kind of parts you play in movies and on television, and do a lecture on your particular subject. And I said, well, what do you think that is? And they said, villainy. And I said, well, it's very close to my heart. And so anyway, one day I was up in Washington State, and I tried it out on the audience. I said, would any of you be interested in hearing about villainy and the history of villainy? And they seemed to think yes, and so I thought, well, I'll try it next year, and I went out, and it was all right. But when I was up there in Washington, I went back to my motel, and believe me, I am also an authority on motels, and particularly the art in motels. It should all be burnt. But I thought, well, you know, this is kind of a test case here, and under my door was a little envelope, and in it was a letter from a girl saying that she had enjoyed my talk on art and was very happy that I was going to speak on villainy sometime in the future, and she thought I might enjoy this little poem. And so she wrote this little poem to me. Her name is Kim Saunders, and she's from Kent, Washington. I take it that she is a teenager. At least I hope so. It's called Verses on Villainy, and it's dedicated to Boris Karloff and Vincent Price, the quick and the dead. Well, here it is. I thought you might enjoy it. Anyone who would aspire to the throne of villainy should remember it requires immense responsibility. Now, every villain has an image he must struggle to uphold, one of eloquent dishonor handed down from days of old. Now, take, for instance, his apparel, top to bottom, front to back. Disregard his favorite hue. Tradition rules he dress in black. Also, there are regulations pertinent to facial hair. Be it in or out of fashion, something must be growing there. All his thoughts have been established to the very last detail. Even as he dreams a scheme, he knows he's doomed to fail. Never will he prove triumphant over those ordained to win. Heroes have a secret weapon, simply called the heroine. Now, heroines are pretty creatures, born without their wits intact. They like to strain their vocal cords, but seldom think and never act. More about that later. Well, imagine then the odds against a villain's victory. Why, to even stay alive, he must resort to treachery, and so he lashes girls to railroad tracks and threatens them with mice, neither one of which is thought to be considered very nice. For variety, he may concoct some lovely sort of bomb, but to suit the hero's timing, all the fuses must be long. Heroes are not very bright. Well, for a villain is expected to behave obediently according to the preference of our society. Yet despite this, he is fortunate to have, though they be few, some worthy representatives personified by you. I think it's kind of cute. when I read this, I thought it was adorable, and so I sat down and I wrote Kim Sanders a little note and said, do you mind if I read your charming little poem to some of the people around the country? I got a little note back saying, not at all, please send me my usual commission. She's a girl with a head on her shoulders. You know, fame is a very fleeting thing, and I'm very happy to have a certain amount of fame. I was very much reminded of it the other day. I got on a plane in Los Angeles to fly over to Phoenix, Arizona. And I have a habit when I get on a plane of falling immediately to sleep. No matter what time of day or night, I get on the plane out like that. In that way, I avoid excessive fear and airplane food. Well, this morning, as usual, I got on the plane and went sound asleep, and I suddenly was very rudely awakened by a young man who shook me. And I woke up somewhat startled, and I said, yes, what can I do for you? He said, you're Boris Karloff, aren't you? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, come on, of course you're Boris Karloff. And he shook me a little more in case I was. And shook me very hard, and he said, come on, now I know you actors, you're timid, you don't want to admit who you are. He said, you are Boris Karloff, aren't you? And I said, no, he's dead. He said, he is? Well, if he's dead, who the hell are you? Well, that left me rather up in the air. I couldn't remember my name. But you know, all those years that I went around talking about art, I began to get worried that people might forget that my real profession is acting, and I'm very much in love with it. After 40 years in movies and on the stage and television and radio and all the different media, I love it even more now. I used to begin to worry that people would forget about my being an actor talking about art. I began to feel like a Salvation Army worker standing on the corner beating a big drum, and he beats his drum and he says, brothers and sisters, I used to steal. It started when I was a little boy. I pinched pennies out of my brother's piggy bank, and it got so bad that one day when I grew up, I stole something from a big department store, and then I saw the light, and now I don't do that anymore. And he beat his big drum, and he said, brothers and sisters, I used to drink. It started when I was a little kid. I'd take the heel taps out of my father's cocktail glass, and it got so bad that when I grew up, I drank a quart of liquor a day, and then I saw the light, and now I don't do that anymore. He said, as a matter of fact, brothers and sisters, I don't do anything anymore but beat this goddamn drum. Well, you know, I'm sure that there are a lot of people in this audience, particularly the women, God bless them, who will understand what it is to be a drum beater. Women have kept the arts alive in America, and don't any of you men forget it. Someday we may be liberated enough for them to let us in on the enjoyment of the arts. I want to assure you right off the bat that I'm really not a villain. As a matter of fact, I lead kind of a double life. I do play a lot of villains on the screen and in TV, and yet I think of myself as being a pretty good citizen. I vote. Well, I used to, and then I go around picking up paper and putting it in trash cans. I never use a detergent with phosphate in it, you know, because I'm worried about the fish in Lake Michigan, if there are any left. And I'm a pretty good husband, a fairly good father. As a matter of fact, I'm practically a perfect example of Planned Parenthood. I have 2 children, one 33 and one 11. I'm sure every parent in this room will understand what I mean by Planned Parenthood about that, because by the time the one 33 grew up, I could afford to educate the one who's 11. But you know, I love playing villains. I really do. I love villains. Oh, they're delicious. They really are. They're so much fun. You know, In the first place, I think one of the reasons I love them is think of the great company that I've been in over the years, all of the marvelous actors who have entertained you over the years, who have played villains. Oh, people like Edward G. Robinson and Charles Laughton and Jimmy Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, the first great sort of anti-hero, and then, my dear friend Peter Lorre and my very, very close friend Boris Karloff. When I first started to play villains, I thought maybe I ought to change my name because Vincent Price is such a pedestrian kind of name. It sounds like I was from Missouri. And I am, you know. Yeah, well, anyway, I thought, well, maybe I ought to change it. And then one of the very first pictures I did, I was playing a sort of something kind of villain. And anyway, in this picture was Boris Karloff. And I thought, now there is really a villainous name. And as I got to know Boris, I found out that his real name was Charles Pratt. Now, if your name is Charles Pratt, you gotta change it, you know. I mean, can you imagine Charles Pratt in Frankenstein? It just doesn't work. But Boris Karloff, what a glorious name. What a really beautiful name. When I was a little kid, I used to go to silent movies, and then in the early days of talkies, I would go and I would always look to see what villains were on the cast list, because I was really, like all kids, much more interested in the villain than the hero. And I would find the names of some of my favorites, men like Warner Oland, and a fellow who had a glorious name, Nigel de Bruyere. Isn't that beautiful? And then one man who had the most villainous name I ever heard in my life. His name was Gustav von Cyphertits. Now, isn't that a beautiful name? I mean, really. If you stay up very, very, very late at night, you can still see Gustav von Cyphertits standing behind Greta Garbo and Norma Shearer and some of the great ladies of that period of movies with a long nose, sort of skulking. Oh, he was a lovely actor. The other thing I love about villains is that they last. They go on and on and on. Now, you take the hero. The hero, you know, the minute his hairline begins to recede and he gets a few bags under the eyes and a couple of crinkles, well, he's through. But the villain, the crinklier and the more creviced and crotchety he gets, the better it is. You know, you like him much better. You know, an awful lot of the famous heroes of movies and of the theater, you never hear about them anymore at all. But the villains go on and on. Many of the very most famous motion picture actors, men like Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart and Jimmy Cagney, they all started playing villains. And I've always thought that that was the reason that their pictures have lasted so long. And actually, both Gable and Bogart have become sort of cult figures among the young people today, because you're never quite sure about Bogart. Is he going to get the girl? Is he the villain? Is he the hero? You never know. Then the other thing I love most about villains is that they appeal to women. Now, this is true. You ask any married woman in this audience, and she will have to confess that she thinks her husband is a villain. It's absolutely true. I mean, take the time when he was courting her, you know, and he was courting her, and she would run to her girlfriend the next day and say, oh, he was so naughty last night. Oh, he was so wicked. Oh, the things he does. Then she marries the poor son of a gun and reforms him and is bored to death with him the rest of her life. Well, anyway, you know, we have a very definite position in the theater. The villain has many very serious reasons for being. In the first place, it is the villain who keeps up the suspense. He is the fellow who has to keep you wondering right straight through the picture whether he is going to get the girl, whether evil is going to try